Okay. Alrighty then. Philosophy of psychology, buckaroos. We're going to take a little trip in the Wayback Machine for a week or two here, and take a look at ancient Greek ideas about the soul and about philosophy of mind. The thing that's going to be to our advantage now is that we have done a good bit of work already this semester. Excuse my eye. Ancient units in your eye. What else is next? Frogs in darkness. All right, so as I was saying, what we've already been doing is talking about exactly what the mind-body problem is. And not only that, but we've been doing it, philosophically speaking, in a pretty old-fashioned way. That is, we've been talking about metaphysics. Typically, nowadays, people look at things epistemologically or psychologically or even politically, and it's not so much in style to really look at things as the metaphysical dimension. But to me, that's really where all the action is here. And so, as I say, an advantage of doing that is that now we can go look at Plato and Aristotle, and they think in this old-fashioned way that I like. And so you'll find that you already have a number of tools in your toolbox that are going to make it a lot easier for you to understand Plato's philosophy of mind and Plato's psychology. I'm going to do it in two parts. This is a video about his dialogue, the Phaedo, and then I'm going to do a second part looking at passages from his book, The Republic. The Phaedo that we're looking at today is considered, it's the dialogue where, let's go ahead and look at the slide, because now I'm starting to talk about what I got on the slide. Let's get this set up here. Stupid thing. There it is. Right. So as I was saying, the Phaedo, El Phaedon in Espanol, Plato's Theory of Mind, Part 1. And this is then the dialogue where Socrates is going to drink the hemlock and dies. It's a transitional dialogue in more ways than one. I guess there's the transition he makes from life to death, of course, at the end. So you've got the early dialogues, which are sort of the passion play. I like to call them the passion play of Socrates, where you've got the Euthyphro and the Meno and the apology, the trial of Socrates. And then the Phaedo is the death scene. And at the end of the Phaedo, Socrates drinks the hemlock and dies. And so Socrates, of course, lover of philosophy that he is, philosophe that he is, wants to do philosophy in the time remaining to him. And since his friends are all distraught that he's going to leave them, then he's going to do philosophy of mind, the mind-body problem, for his last 45 minutes or so. And in particular, he's going to give them his arguments for the immortality of the soul. Now, I do, let me even step out of this just for a second. I do actually want to say here that a couple things. One is, here I think we'll find the only really interesting argument for mind-body dualism that there is, as far as I know, and I really have made a bit of a career out of sort of looking for them. And this one is interesting and it's important, and it's one that I devoted one of the 3 chapters in my manuscript on philosophy of mind is about this problem of rationality. And so, so let's get back to it then. Right. Right, and so so what do we have here is form. We're going to look at form matter dualism. Oh, well, that's the other thing too. What we have here is a pre-Cartesian ancient sort of way of looking at things. So Cartesian ideas about the inner and the outer and the mental as being sort of a metaphysical substance that's different from physical substances, and that kind of stuff really aren't here so much. And that's one of the reasons why it's so interesting, because if we're used to modern ways of framing the mind-body problem, we find with the ancient Greeks altogether different ways of doing that. So let's go over some arguments. You see these little numbers with the letters on the top. Those are Stephanus numbers. If you have a good edition of Plato, you should have those numbers in the columns. They actually date from the 11th century of the Common Era, but they are just some technology to help everybody get on the right page, dating from the era when everyone had their own hand-copied editions, and it is very useful. So these then are the locations of these arguments. And so I want to do two things. I mean, one is I started off saying, before I forgot what I was talking about, in case you didn't notice, that that with this argument here in the Phaedo, we get, as far as I know, the really only interesting argument for any kind of mind-body dualism that I know of that there is. And then the other thing I wanted to say then, the second part of that was this, that let's look at Plato's arguments here and not sort of valorize them or mystify them. Let's look and see if he has any arguments that actually can sort of persuade us or convince us that there might be any sort of metaphysical reason for thinking there was a distinction between the soul and the body, what he's calling the soul, or let's maybe call it the mind and the body. And not all of these arguments work. And a lot of arguments in Plato are strange, because, as I said, as far as what's interesting about it. So the coextension of opposites, an important topic in Greek cosmology, an important topic for Heraclitus, a lot of other Greek thinkers, and something that Plato talks a lot about because he's interested in saying about something that it is large, that it is red, and so on. That is the issue of predication, saying about something that it has a property. And that's one of the ways he has of looking at what makes the world go round, the way form interacts with matter. So he says, look, you've got these coextensive opposites. They're not really opposites, they're really spectrums, the larger and the smaller, or the hot and the cold. The hot and the cold is temperature, right? And larger and smaller is sort of relative size or something like that. We could call these perspectival. It sort of depends on where you are on the range of temperature, right? And then the other example is there as being separated and being organized. So Plato says that the living and the dead, he also says about the waking and the sleeping. He says that first. He says, the being awake and being asleep are the opposite of each other. So when you wake up, you come out of sleep and come out of sleeping, right? When you go to sleep, you go out of waking. And he says the same things about living and dying. The living come from the dead, and the dead come from the living. And the argument here is kind of funky, really, because what he wants to say is something like this, that everything can't just keep getting larger. If everything just keeps getting larger and larger and nothing ever gets smaller, think about what that would be. Or, right? Or if everyone just only went to sleep and never woke up again. I mean, it has to be that it's going to balance it out somehow. So that second bullet point, right? The opposites must perpetually exchange dominance. That's a funky argument. As I say, it's funky when you think about it's going to have to do with any distinction at all. So hot and cold. So what if it only ever got hotter or it never got colder? Then what would happen, right? That's the argument. So he says, look, any kind of opposites like that, they're going to have to balance each other out somehow. And this is just ancient Greek physics, by the way. This is, it looks like some sort of crazy logic. He's really thinking more physically than logically. If you ask him, he's thinking about the way they look at universal cycles and things. But the problem with this, and this happens in a few different places in this literature, there's a bunch of different kinds of opposites. And some things are just conventional opposites. Male and female aren't really opposites. I mean, they're not opposites in the way that up and down are opposites, or on and off are opposites. Some things really are opposites. Or put it this way, there's a couple different kinds of opposites, of pairs that we call opposites. Some we just call opposite more or less conventionally, I would say. Well, maybe not conventionally, but you see that they're not literally logical opposites. So it doesn't look to me like living and alive and dead are opposites. I don't think that being alive and being dead are opposites. It looks to me like being alive, it looks to me like living things sort of emerge out of non-living things that are just some sort of really, really fancy version, fancy organization of non-living things. It's all the same. That's what I think. And so again, what am I doing here? I'm looking at these Platonic arguments, just asking myself, well, do I buy any of this, or do I think any of this makes any sense or not? And this one, I'd say no, and I'd say no because it doesn't look to me like living and dead are actually logical opposites in any way. So I don't think they're coextensive the way that light and dark are coextensive in their sort of range of illumination. I don't think that's the case with animate and inanimate. Yeah, call me crazy. The very famous doctrine of recollection. This is interesting. Of course, by the way, they have psychology sorted out from philosophy. Psychology sorted out from philosophy actually really quite late, really. And if you want to do the history of psychology, if you go back to the 18th century, you're just looking at philosophers, quote unquote. I mean, John Locke's doing perceptual psychology all over the place, for example. So famously, and he mentions this in a few different places. He also mentions this in the Meno, where he shows that a young unschooled child can be shown to be able to learn simple geometrical exercises and other kind of arithmetic exercises. And so the idea then is that, look, the soul must have existed prior to this lifetime because this young child obviously knows some things. With a little coaxing, they can be shown to know how to figure out squares and areas. One thing here, of course, is that, again, just taking Plato as a peer and saying, look, what do I think about the argument? Someone said this to me over coffee. It looks to me like there's a difference between innate knowledge and innate ability. Even if there was something that looked like knowledge, we could ask how it got there, I guess. But it looks like what we're really talking about when we talk about, say, the ability of Meno's slave boy to learn geometry is some kind of innate ability. Now, and of course for me, because I'm very gung-ho on evolutionary biology, then I would say, and we have the way to do innate abilities. Notice, interestingly, though, I would say it's the fourth bullet point there on the slide. Evolutionary biology's way of explaining things isn't that different from remembrance. I mean, your positive and negative memories from your lifetime and things you've learned from those experiences, and then your species traits and the reasons why those traits have evolved are similar. It's operational. Law of effect. Positive results reinforce, negative results extinguish. But in any event, no, not buying the doctrine of recollection next. But see, that's the thing, then it starts to get interesting. Because the argument about the indivisibility of the soul really is interesting. The thing is, where is Plato getting his intuitions, these transcendental intuitions that he has? Is it all just gobbledygook? You have to see, in this case, that this person has a reason for thinking these things. It's not just sort of spiritual rhetoric or something. Oftentimes students will think we're supposed to sort of learn these charming mantras, like it's like a beautiful painting or something, and it just says something that's really beautiful or something, even though it doesn't make sense when taken that way. The indivisibility of the soul. What's indivisible? Well, math. Math is indivisible. You can't cut mathematics in half. And if you have any little chunk of mathematics, you can generate all of mathematics from the little chunk. Even just from the concept of number itself, you can generate all the rest of mathematics, including all the really weird proofs and everything. Proof of the infinity of primes and all that. So it's indivisible. It's eternal. It doesn't, and immutable. It doesn't change. It doesn't come to be and pass away. It doesn't change. It's indivisible. Mathematics, I'm talking about. So just think about it as sort of in its totality. And so then let's look at the slide. Very, very close on what it says in the dialogue. There are visible and divisible things, this world of physical things, which are visible and divisible. And then there's a world, he says, of invisible, indivisible things. And with our body, we appreciate beautiful physical things. But with our capacity for abstraction, I guess, our reason, we appreciate beauty. So he says. And equality. With the math examples, it's easier to see. I think it's more intuitive. So another thing to notice about Plato, of course, is a lot where Christianity gets it from, right? The body is a source of corruption. The soul is transcendental. And the more you get the soul cleansed of the body, the better off you're going to be. So if you want to think about these two sets of properties, the property being visible and divisible and having extension in space, and being contingent, not necessary, or the property being invisible, indivisible, not extended in space, and necessary, logically necessary. Compare the physical world with mathematics, the totality of mathematics. Can you see what I mean when I say the totality of mathematics? And then having made that distinction, of course, between form and matter. What is form? It's this mathematical organization of the world, and it's the source of value. Every pleasure and every pain provides another nail to rivet the soul to the body and weld them together. It's very much like the wheel of karma, that can't be missed. And so if our soul is too involved with the body, if our soul isn't purified enough, we're not going to be ready for death. And we're going to take, and he says here, reincarnation is here. We're going to, in this dialogue, we're going to come back as some sort of bad kind of animal that reflects the bad personality trait, a wolf or a hog or whatever it is. Socrates is looking forward to being liberated. That's why he asks to make us sacrifice a cock to Asclepius at the end, because that's what you do when you've been cured of an illness. You've been cured of the illness of having a body. It's a very, very similar to Hindu and Buddhist ideas, and I think one of the exciting things going on these days is realizing the world back then wasn't that big, and it's not a coincidence that so many of these ideas are the same. Now, this is for me the most important element, the most important little part of the Phaedo. I'm interested in philosophy of mind, as you know, quite apart from doing ancient Greek philosophy. This is the first time we've done ancient Greek philosophy this semester. And so I was interested in a number of these issues about the philosophy of mind and these theories of mind that we've been learning. And at the same time, I'd always liked ancient Greek philosophy since I was an undergraduate, but it was just a separate thing that I liked. Until finally one day, though, I realized, and I guess this is always inevitably happens, but I saw that these arguments in Plato were exactly the arguments that I was thinking about in philosophy of mind, in contemporary philosophy of mind. So that was a really good connection for me. That's really helped me a lot. So let me explain that to you with this example of the lyre, a little instrument like a little guitar string instrument, and the harmony. So Simmias and Cebes are Thebans. They're exchange students from Thebes. I guess they're from the University of Thebes or something. So they're there and they're listening. And they're talking in the back, and Socrates, the professor, says, "Hey, you guys in the back, if you're saying something that's worth sharing, why don't you share it?" That kind of thing. And they say, "Well, look," and we'll do Simmias's argument because they say that's the one that I care about. They say, "Look, you've shown that the mind is something different from the body with these previous examples of yours," they say, "but you haven't shown that the mind can exist without the body. So, for example, with the reasons that you've given us, it follows that the harmony of the music is not the same thing as the lyre, the guitar, the little wooden instrument. But nonetheless, I mean, if unfortunately the instrument was broken, then the harmony surely would disappear. So, so then comes a really important argument. And what Socrates says is this. He says, look, so here's the way of thinking about it. What Simmias is suggesting is that the causation runs from the physical object, the lyre, to the harmony. That it's the physical object, the instrument, that's causing the harmony. That's the causal relationship from the instrument to the harmony. But consider the set of all musical instruments. That is, the lyre and the piano and the saxophone and the guitar and what have you. Right? And they all are harmonious. And how is it that they're all harmonious? Is it just random? I mean, if the rule was just that the physical properties of the instrument cause the harmony, then I suppose that just about anything would be harmonious. But we don't think just about anything is. In fact, fine musical instruments are extremely difficult to craft. Hundreds and hundreds of years of tradition. Really hard to make a good one. Why is it so hard to make a good one? Well, because it's the instrument, the physical object, that has to conform to the harmony. So now think about this. The logic comes from the brain. If you destroy the brain, you destroy the logic. The causal relationship runs from the brain to the logic. But that's backwards. It's just as backwards as saying that the causal relationship runs from the instrument to the harmony. The causal relationship is from the harmony to the instrument, and the causal relationship is from the logic to the brain. The brain is the way that it is because the logical world is the way that it is. That's why if you are drunk on Kant, you can't understand Plato. What am I doing? What am I doing? No, I thought that was such a good exit. No, it was so cool. All right, last slide then. Form-matter dualism. So we're not looking at Cartesian dualism. Remember, Cartesian substance dualism, if you will, was a metaphysical dualism that said there was mental substance and then there was physical substance, and there were two different kinds of things that both existed, but they existed separately. Now, in this case, what I'm suggesting to you is think rather about mathematics and the metaphysics of mathematics. It looks like mathematics doesn't depend on the physical world. There wouldn't have to be any physical world for there to be a rational being to see the mathematics. Who cares if there's a rational being? It looks like the mathematics is all going to be valid anyway. Minds are not. It looks like it's mind independent as well as matter independent. So Plato just thinks, I mean, this is basically the doctrine. We'll talk about this more when in the next video, we talk about the Republic. Plato thinks, look, you've got, there's a couple things in you. You have physical matter, but the physical matter also has all of this form. In the same way that a circular thing has the form of circularity, and a harmonic thing has the form of harmoniousness, so too you, a human, have the form of rationality. And so you're a very formally organized thing. The advantage of that, right, is that doesn't mean then, unlike Descartes, who's much more voodoo than Plato, I think, right? Because Descartes thinks that, well, God and humans have minds and humans have minds because God put the minds in humans and doesn't have anything to do with the physical world. Plato is thinking, look, there's the physical world. Why does something exist rather than nothing? I don't know. And then that world is organized formally. Why is it organized formally rather than not organized? Who knows? Again, who knows? It's a cosmic question. But the advantage, again, of that is that then the human being's mind is just another example, just like the spherical rock of a piece of matter, namely my body or that chunk of rock, participating in form, namely that rock being spherical and me being rational. That is the deal. And so I'm just going to run that up the flagpole and see who salutes. I'm going to have to stop, doing bad things. Alrighty then. So I'm going to make another one going over Plato's discussion of the soul and the components of the soul from books 4 and 5 of the Republic. I'm pretty sure that is. Bye-bye.